Rural Heritage on RFD TV is brought to you by Rural Heritage Magazine, a bi-monthly magazine featuring articles about farming and logging with draft animal power, small-scale diversified family farming and homesteading, and other aspects of our rich rural heritage. Rural Heritage Magazine, borrowing from yesterday to do the work of today. For subscription information, please call 319-362-3027 or order online at www.ruralheritage.com. Hi, I'm Joe Mishka welcoming you to another episode of Rural Heritage TV. Jerry Hicks has a number of stone fences or walls on his north central Kentucky farm, and wanting to preserve their heritage, he's begun learning how to build and repair dry stone walls. We spent a couple of days with Jerry last year as he and his friend Christian began repairing a stretch of wall bordering one of his pastures. It's going to take 2 episodes to get through this process, so let's get started.
What I'm doing here, we're talking about here today is a rock wall, and this is an example of dry stone masonry. It's a type of walling that's been done in Kentucky since the 1770s. The oldest walls, and was pretty much continued by ordinary farmers up until about the 1940s. This wall here is an example of the later style of wall. There's basically 2 types in Kentucky of the older walls. There's what's called a plantation style, and it follows some of the better building patterns that were used in Scotland and other places that were traditions that were of walling that were brought over. And what you typically see in a plantation wall is the slope sides. It's called batter, and they will have a good batter, meaning that a good batter being something like a 1-inch inward slope for every 6 inches of rise, and that makes for a stronger wall and a more stable wall. Typically in a plantation style wall, you'll see a lot of good packing in the center. That's called coring or harding. These small rocks that are put in between those 2 stacks of rock to make it more solid and stable. Typically you'll see in a plantation wall, you'll see through stones, tie rocks, and I've done that some myself in what I've already repaired. This is a tie rock here, this is a tie rock here, and this is a tie rock there. And what they do, they go all the way through the wall and overhang a couple of inches on either side, and they tie both sides of the wall together and make it more stable. Typically, you'll also see cover rocks, which this wall has cover rocks. I don't know that they intended it that way, but these bigger rocks that you see that cover the top, those are your cover rocks. And then these rocks that are standing, that's called your copes or your coping. And they typically, what you want is a triangular shaped rock that'll give you a good jagged edge, and the idea is that'll keep cattle and horses from leaning over the wall and pushing on it, and it also helps to keep people from wanting to crawl back and forth over the wall, that sort of thing. Well then, that style of fencing typically goes from the early days of 1770s, like I was saying, up until about 1850, and then what you start seeing is what's called turnpike walls. And that happened at a period in more prosperity in the country, I guess. Things, the industrial age is really starting to kick off. There's a period of a lot of road building, thus the turnpike name, because everybody wanted one of these big walls to front the road, you know, to show their estate. And another thing was going on was these wealthy farmers, primarily in the bluegrass area of Kentucky, and we're in the outer bluegrass here, but in the central bluegrass region, a lot of these prosperous planters were sending their sons on European tours, and they were coming back and wanting to make over that part of Kentucky into the England that they had seen. And so you see that tradition carrying over. Well, another thing that was happening at this time, we had the potato famine going on in Ireland. So all this, the Irish diaspora, they were leaving Ireland and going wherever they could, and one of the things that they did here was they took on jobs as gangs of masons, dry stone wallers, and they were building these turnpike walls, and they'd usually be a foreman, an overseer, and then all these immigrants that were working under him. and they were paid by the yard. So their incentive was to build fast and move on with the mindset they're probably never going to come through this area again, and the next gang of wallers will come through and take over. And they're not as good a quality wall typically. What you see is the batter goes from 1 in 6 to a 1 in 8. So you've got steeper sides, and that makes for a less stable wall. You'll see a lot less of the coring, harding packing, and that makes them a little less stable. And one of the things we're seeing here is these big rocks that are put on the top. They're put there, in this case, for weight. And they've done their purpose. I mean, it's hard for me to stand here and say that this is a poor wall when chances are it's stood here since the 1860s. So we're looking at a wall that's over 150, 60 years old. But I'm rebuilding this area because this whole valley right here had about 12 foot of water under it. A couple of years ago, we had 200-year floods within a 3-week period. And this whole section of wall right here, it had been repaired and not done exactly right, and it washed out. So I've already started here building a wall head, which that's the end of the wall that goes against the gate post, and I'm working on putting a wall back in. Now the part that I'm putting in, I'm using what would be traditional plantation walling methods, and I've tied in to this wall here. And even though this is less than ideal, it's still standing, and I'm not going to do anything to this wall unless I just have to in my lifetime. But we're going to be repairing a piece of wall down here that it's what I say is a turnpike style wall. And I'm going to put it back matching the batter fairly closely to what's there, just because I'm tying in on both ends. I may make a few changes. I'll probably put some tie rocks in. I'll put good covers. And another thing that I would do, and is considered a better way of building, is the heavier rocks really need to be in the lower sections of the walls, and you can get smaller as you go up. Where you see these smaller, thinner rocks here, those would typically break under the weight of these bigger rocks above. So you want your bigger rocks in the bottom.
You've seen our America's Rule Yesterday 3-book set covering life on the farm in the early 1900s. We're excited to bring you a 4th edition to the series, Early Tractors, featuring more than 250 photos of early American tractors like Alice Chalmers, Oliver, John Deere, Farmall, Minneapolis Moline, and lots more. Most of the photos are of new or almost new tractors back in the day, showing exactly how they were configured when they came out of the factory. Tractor collectors, history buffs, and folks simply wanting to reminisce about farm life in America's Rule Yesterday will love to have this book. It sells for $24.95 plus shipping. If you buy more than one book in the series, the price per book goes down all the way to $69.95 for all 4 books. To order, call toll-free 877-647-2452 or visit www.mishka.com. That's 1-877-647-2452.
One of the things that really hurt these walls in our area in the 1930s and 40s, there was people came around with rock crushers, and they bought these walls so much a rod, and they crushed them for lime, and then the farmer would get them spread back on the farm. I think, the flood took a lot of the coping off of this, but also I think down through here, a lot of the coping and the top stones probably went in to fill this road. So a lot of this, because it was already built alongside those old turnpikes, and this road here goes back to the 1700s. At one time they actually used to have to drive up the creek bed, but when they built the roads up, they used them old walls and threw them in to fill in and raise the road bed up. We're going to take this apart, and there's a method to taking down a wall, and it'll help you with putting it back up. Now, when I started to take this wall down, and I have started on some of it, there was no coping. There was some coping here, but it wasn't on top of the wall, obviously. It had all fallen out. And because that's the last thing I want to put up, and it takes a certain kind of rock, I've gathered up rocks that'll make good coping, and I've lined them up back here. So once that goes back up, I'll put these copes along the top. Now this is a rock that I think was part of the original coping. And I say that because we got the triangular shape we want, but what we also see is this discoloration, this green and the mold and moss that was growing on it. That typically would tell you that that was an exposed rock, and this part here was probably stood up against the other copestones. Yeah. And that's what you'll look for when you take a piece of wall like this down. All of this green, moldy, lichen-covered stone, it's all the exposed exterior stone, and that'll give you some kind of hint of how it's going to go back in. Now, this is just a jumble the way this fell out. Ideally, and I've sorted out some of the bigger rocks over here. I've got one there and here. Like I was saying earlier, all those bigger rocks really should go in the bottom of the wall. You want those on the lower levels. This big rock right here may actually, if we don't, I'm hoping there's a good foundation, but if not, that big rock right there would be one, he'd be a candidate to go into the foundation. When I built that wall head down there, I brought up some 8-inch thick stone to put in for the foundation. And
you brought up from elsewhere?
Yeah, out of the creek over here. Right, okay. But now when you put a foundation in these walls, it's not like pouring a footer or anything for a house. You want to go down to about, when you hit the subsoil, in this case around here, 4 to 6 inches, will just about do it. A traditional plantation style wall should be about 26 inches at the base, and your foundation would be about 32 inches, something like that. And I don't know what we're going to find here once we tie into this wall. Like I said, this is a turnpike era wall, and from what I've seen, I haven't seen a rock in this wall yet that was ever touched by a hammer. So that tells me they just laid them up quick. They didn't shape anything to fit. We'll get into this wall then and see what we've got. And like I said, as I sort through this, I'm going to try, I really want to try to keep the stones as close to the wall as I can, because it'll make it easier for going back in. And I will, like these rocks on this side, I'll want to step over there and make a stack on that side too, because I'll have a helper when we go back to laying this up, and we'll be working across from each other trying to work together and build this wall back up. So I'm going to kind of, as I see things, I'll point them out here, and okay. We'll see what we've got. See, like a piece like that right there, they've probably used that as a shim, and you really do not want to shim from the outside. You always want to pack from the inside out, because these pieces, they're just going to roll off the wall like that. So we'll see what we get into here. Yeah, see that wall right there, and I don't think that has moved this much really, what we're looking at from when it was set. You're looking at 24, 25 inches on the top of this wall. And that gets back to, if you look down the sides, there's no slope right here. They just stacked up and then put those big heavy rocks on there to hold it in place. So there's no batter. And I'm not saying that had there been, it would have still been able to survive these trees, but it would have stood a better chance. It would have been a lot more stable, which in this case, we see the roots have pushed under and heaved it out. But you get in, a lot of these small trees, the wind gets to whipping them, and they'll hammer that wall and knock it over. But with that wall being that wide, it's going to have probably more rock in it than what it really needed, and the rocks weren't laid properly to get the best effect for what they had. So, I said I would put this back the way it was, and I may not exactly do that, but I would definitely want to put some batter into this wall, and I will use lines. I'll use a mason's line to lay it out here, and like I said, we're going to put a little bit of a curve in here around this tree, and I may have to bridge some of those roots in here too. We'll just have to see what we get into when we get down there. And right here, this is a good place to look. look right back in there, and you see how hollow that wall is.
Yeah.
That should all be packed.
Yeah.
And there's a temptation, when you pack a wall, there's a temptation to want to pour gravel in. And some of these turnpike wallers did that.
Okay.
But what happens when you dump a bucket of gravel in there, it's just like you dumped in a bucket of ball bearings. And over time,
It'll find a way down.
It'll find a way down, but if it gets under these rocks, this wall's always moving.
Yeah, yeah.
And that rock will eventually roll around in that gravel and it'll roll out.
Right.
You want to use flat rocks like these, and you want to place those in there, and as you place them, and pack it tight as you go up. It always
shifting.
Yeah,
Just lets it shift.
right. And it'll always take a lot more packing than what you think it would take. And here again, we've got that trace walling. That should have been turned into the wall. Yeah. But we're getting close to finding out what kind of foundation this old wall had. And I may have to go get my digging bar to bring up some of these rocks. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go get a pick and a digging bar to bring some of that up. I think what I'm digging up right here, though, is more of those rocks that have rolled out over time.
Right.
And this is just silted up over it.
Okay.
I really think.
Because they're set in there pretty good.
Well, yeah, they are, but the thing is, like, this is standing on edge.
Yeah, right.
So that tells me
It fell out.
it's fell out and rolled down.
Yeah.
And based on the width of their wall, I think this may be foundation here. And I'm gonna bet if I take this wall back any more, there's probably rocks under that one that is the foundation. Yeah, see there's rocks right there. That's a foundation rock under this one. I think that one right there has rolled out.
Yeah.
And I may go back to the house and get a chainsaw, or even I may just come back with an axe. I don't know. I'll come back with something. I was hoping there'd be a foundation here that we could use,
Right.
but this tree root has moved it, and I can see it's growed over it in places here. And I'll bring that out this evening, and we'll put this back tomorrow. As we talked before, the cause of this wall tipping was this tree. The tree was the main culprit. Poor construction didn't lend itself to saving the wall either, but that was the main cause. Well, I had thought that I could cut that root out. That root extended from here over to in this area right there, and as you can see, I cut it back as much as I could to the tree. But then there was rocks. This rock here was a face rock. It came all the way over and was growed into the tree. And I broke it up as much as I could, but I couldn't get in there and cut that root out. It had grown over the rock, and as you see here, under the rock. And then, of course, part of the root came this way, and then part of it where it hit the wall actually grew down. So that root goes pretty deep down in here. And really, without a stump grinder or something to bring it out, or a dozer or something like that, which a dozer is going to do more damage to the wall and everything too. But we're going to try to overcome that and curve around it, and that's going to change a little bit of the way we work here today. But I think that's going to save us a lot of headaches down the road, because any of that root that's left there at some point is going to rot, the ground's going to give, and our wall's going to rock the other way probably. And you know, as we've talked before, the wall's pretty poorly built to begin with, and as I worked that way, you saw here, it's not getting any better. It's getting worse the farther that way I go, and that area needs to be taken down and restacked too.
Right.
So there may come a time, my goal here is to keep cattle in. I need to get the wall back up to where it'll turn a cow, and that's what we're going to do today. But there may come a time when I get this tree out, this tree will be firewood. And when I get that done, you know, then we may relay this and put it back to a straight wall. But in the meantime, I'm going to build a curve in it and try to make something solid enough that it'll be there as long as I need a wall if I don't ever get back to.
So you won't be able to use strings?
I won't be able to use strings, and so we're, like I was saying, we're going to try to do like they did here. They eyeballed the batter, and that's really not something you should do, but we're going to have to in this situation. We're going to build, I'll put together a form here, and I'll show you what forms are and talk about the form that we're going to use. But I'm going to put together a form on the center that will give us the traditional 6-in-1 pitch that we want, the batter. That wasn't how the old wall was built, and we're gonna try just to tie in and match what they've got on either side. So the only place that really is going to have the ideal build is what we're doing on the center here, and I think that by doing it that way and putting a tie rock in here, we're going to build a solid enough wall that it will hold both sides as long as we need it to. This is the form, and this is what I was talking about. You see how it slopes in on either side. The distance from here to here is 14 inches at the bottom of this board, and that will be what is effectively the top of the wall. The bottom of this board is at 18 inches, which is in a 4-foot wall, which has a 3-foot rise to it. That's the halfway point, and that's where I've put in my tie rocks. So I know that I've got this 18-inch height. That's where my ties go in. And this is setting on a 34-inch foundation. I've got one leg on the foundation, and where there was a slope on the rock on the other side, I just found a small piece of rock that I could put under there until I could lay a level on this and bring it up to true. Right. I've driven these rebar pieces in to hold that form in place, and that's just to keep it steady. These are my masonry pins. I've got these, and then I've got a set that I whittled out. I kind of like the wooden ones a little better. I can push them into the wall and it seems like they grip the rocks better. But that's what these are made for. That's a masonry pin. You can bring them back, drive them into the ground. You can drive them into the wall. Braided mason strings better than the twisted twine. You can find the twisted pretty cheaply, but it'll always pull apart. If you ever have to cut it, it frays. The braided, it just grips better, holds better, makes a more durable line. So where I've had to keep putting my wire panels up to keep cattle in while I'm working on this wall, it keeps loosening my stakes, and I have to redo all that every time I work. But you need about enough line on one of these pins. You'll want enough to go about.
Next week, we'll be back with Jerry as he and Christian continue repairing the wall, so be sure to tune in. This program is available for purchase. To order your copy, please call 319-362-3027 or visit www.ruralheritage.com. Rural Heritage is a bi-monthly magazine dedicated to draft animal farming and logging, as well as other aspects of our rich rural heritage. It is published by Mishka Press, which also offers a complete line of back-to-the-land books, DVDs, and calendars. Call or write for a catalog or subscription information, or visit our website at www.ruralheritage.com.